Thank you so very much. It's a joy to be here with each of you, especially at the beginning of a new year. Think about it. Every year we recognize the fact that the prior year we had stress in our lives. How did that happen? Why did it happen? Who among you has never experienced stress? Please raise your hands. I'd like you to think, and I thank you for being so candid, I'd like you to think a little bit about the 3 greatest sources of your stress. What are they? Is it work? Is it family? Is it relationships? Is it money? Is it job? If you had to identify, is it a spouse? I see a little interaction there. Is it a spouse? I'd like you to think about the 3 greatest sources of stress in your own life. We recognize the fact that we've all had it. What would yours look like? Would anybody like to shout out and let me know?
Family.
Money.
Family. Relationships.
Work. Relationships. Anything else?
Children.
Children.
Health.
Young children or older children. And even health. Health and wealth, as a matter of fact. They are real stressors in each of our relationships. And we need to overcome them, or at least learn how to deal with them. That's one of the things that we're going to talk about in this presentation. So I'm really glad that you're here. The important thing is to keep that stress from breaking you down. Don't let it tear at you. Don't allow it to break you down. You need to build resistance in order to have good health. Lack of resistance results in a word that is not misspelled, dis-ease, D-I-S-E-A-S-E. And what does that relate to? It relates to the fact that your cells are too acidic, and when your cells are too acidic and your resistance is low, you get dis-ease at the cellular level. Your body is not happy with what you're feeding it, with what you're doing to it, with how you're allowing it to relax and to recuperate. So are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? I think yes. So let's differentiate, if we can, what exactly is stress? What does that mean? What does it mean to different people? It's often characterized by over-engagement. Over-engagement is something we'll be talking about a little later when I start to talk about the word no. But in essence, too many of us overcommit to too many things. Can you write that paper for me? The answer is yes. Can you help me with my content outline or my presentation? The answer is yes. Can you be on the board of my association? The answer is yes. And a couple of weeks ago, somehow out of the blue, I was actually asked to be the president of an association that I only joined 6 months ago, and every single member of the group was prepared at the doctoral level in cellular biology, and I was so less unprepared than each and every one of them that I was shocked that they would even ask me. But I was smart. I didn't over-engage. I said, I am so honored to be asked to fulfill that responsibility. Thank you so much for seeing in me something that would add value to the group. And I will help you in any way possible. But no, I honestly cannot serve as your president. We all need to know how to do that. And sometimes it's emotional and we become overreactive and we don't really know that it's okay to say no. We don't recognize the fact that it's okay if you cannot commit to just one more thing on your plate. Because unless your plate is the size of this auditorium, how many things can you possibly fit? And we all have the same number of hours per day. How many things, how many responsibilities can you put into that minimal number of hours? So often what happens is we produce a sense of urgency or hyperactivity. Our glands start to work. Our hormones start to work. We lose energy. We think, how much more can I possibly do? One day I'll wake up and I cannot even get out of bed today. I'm so exhausted from so many stressors in my life. Often this leads to anxiety disorders. The primary damage is often physical, although it can be social, it can be emotional, it can be mental, but it's often physical. And it's your body's response to the stressors that you've surrounded yourself with. And guess what? It can actually kill you prematurely. Do I think as a nurse that I've ever seen stress listed on a death certificate? Probably not. But there are so many precursors and so many contributing factors that it can, in fact, kill one way beyond the time in which they would ordinarily pass. So which of these is stress? You receive a promotion at work. Is that stressful? I think it could be. I know with a relative recently who got a great promotion and a great opportunity, she was in fact stressed because she wasn't sure that she could do the job. And yet it took a plethora of family members to say they wouldn't have brought you in to do that job if you were not the most capable person. So sometimes it's that. If your car has a flat tire, maybe your car has a couple of flat tires. I think you can relate to that. I remember one time being on 294 and my car just stopped dead. It was a brand new car. There was no reason for it to die. It was a Mercedes. There was surely no reason for it to die. And it just stopped cold. And the dealership sent a tow truck to come and pick me up. And it seemed when you're sitting there in a freezing car by the side of the road at 5 p.m. on 294, and the traffic is whizzing right by you, that someone for sure is going to drive right into you. And what might be 20 minutes somehow escalates, even for those who've mastered exaggeration like myself, to almost be 1 hour. And you think, how much longer can I sit here? And when I went to the dealership with the car, the response to me was, it's because you don't know how to pump gas. And I looked at this gentleman and I said, excuse me? I have been driving, sir, since before you were born. How could I possibly not know how to pump gas? And as it was, there was a fault somewhere between the gas tank itself, I'm not that technical, but between the gas tank and where the gas goes, and there was a small leak in it. And that was permeating the entire car, so that even when you got into it, the entire back seat smelled like gasoline. End result, my stress disappeared because they gave me a brand new car. And that often doesn't happen, but that was one way to get rid of that stress. It was much more than a flat. What if you go to a party and the party is supposed to end at 11 but somehow lasts until 2? And 2 is not a problem except that you need to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning for a flight. Or you have young children and those children are going to get up not knowing that you were out all night, having a great time. They don't understand. I know that with my granddaughter, they say don't get out of bed until you see light outside. Well, gosh, with the change of seasons and the change of time, light outside can be quite early. That can be stressful. What if your dog gets sick and he gets sick all over your home just before you're about to have company? Or in a place where you don't care to have to clean it up? What about if your new bedroom set is being delivered and you don't know that you're going to be there at the same time that the delivery person shows? Or what about your best friend and his wife come to stay, and they say that they're going to stay for a week and something happens and they stay for 3 weeks? I remember that happened to my sister, who at the time was living in Dublin, Ireland. And a cousin of ours, who wasn't really a relative, we call him a cousin affectionately, but he was the brother of our mutual brother-in-law. And he showed up in Ireland because if you live in a great exotic place, everybody wants to be your house guest, right? And so he showed up at the door and he brought practically everything he owned, and he was staying for 3 days in transit to some other area. But guess what? He made himself comfortable on the couch, and at the end of 3 months, bless my sister for her patience, at the end of 3 months, she packed all of his things while he was gone during the day and put them by the front door and locked it and said, I'm really sorry, I can't deal with it any longer. No, you cannot stay here. She was stressed. What if you get the flu? What if you got a flu shot and the flu shot that you got is not responsive to the current strain of flu and you feel miserable? What if the school calls you and talks about a sick child? We talk about that a lot in my field, in nursing, because if you're responsible for a couple of patients and the school calls and says your child is sick or your child broke his leg, where is your mindset? It's not with whatever it is you're supposed to be doing. It's probably with your child, and how fast can I turf my responsibilities onto somebody else and get out of here so that I can be where I perceive I'm needed most? And then what if you're laid off? It happens. It often happens a week before the holidays, before the winter holidays. I remember one time when my husband was running a large hospital system, the owner came to him, it was a private system, and said, I want you to lay off 20 people. And it was a couple of weeks before the Christmas holidays. And he thought to himself and said, I can't do that. How can I possibly do that? Lots of my staff are single moms or single parents. If I lay them off at this time of the year or at any time of the year, how is that going to affect their lives? I can't do it. And so he found a legitimate and ethical way out of it. But there was no way, and I give him great credit for this, that he would ever lay them off. Nobody wants that pink slip. I'm not sure it's even pink anymore. I think in terms of, it must be a text message these days. Isn't that how people communicate? It must be an email. And guess what? If it goes into your spam box or you didn't open it, you go to work and don't even know that you were laid off. How bad can that be? So let's talk about work and how work is perhaps a source of stress. When people go to work, they shouldn't have to leave their hearts at home. That's from Betty Bender. They shouldn't have to leave their hearts at home. Work cannot be so encompassing that it takes every thought process to be able to get you through a single day. How hard can that be? If you're in a job that you love and a profession that brings you joy, and I always say to people, think about what brings you the greatest joy in your life. What makes you get out of bed in the morning? What makes you feel joyous and satisfied and happy? That's the kind of work that you should be doing. But think about all of those folks in your lives, the people with whom you come in contact. How many of them love what they do? How many love what they do? If I had to ask you in this room, how many of you truly love what you do and don't spend at least 1/10 of your time, perhaps even on the computer at work, searching for someplace else to work and searching for something else to do that will bring you great joy? We won't even talk about the games that you play in between. But what about those job searches? So much of our stress is work-related. It's being unhappy in your job. It's not liking your boss. It's not liking the people with whom you have to work. If you're in a situation where everyone is in a cubicle, perhaps the person next door to you is really noisy or plays loud music or has a big bowl of candy right on her desk when you're trying to lose those 20-plus pounds that you gained over the holidays when last year's resolution was to lose 10 pounds and you started out at the end of the year 13 pounds heavier than last year. How does that work? Do the math. Perhaps you're working long hours. Perhaps the workload is too much responsibility. Think about those folks who were laid off. When they're laid off, but the same amount of work needs to get done, who's going to do that work? The people who are left over. And so you get much more work to do than you had originally bargained for, and it becomes even more challenging. Maybe you have poor management. Have you ever worked in a place where you thought, how did that guy get to be my manager? I know so much more than he does. Haven't you often wondered, how does that happen? How do people get to be the president of IBM? And you feel as if they don't have perhaps the credentials on paper, but certainly don't have the smarts in terms of how to handle people. What about lack of input in the decision-making process? Everyone loves change, right? To a certain degree. People love change when they're a part of that change process, when they can be included in the decisions and in the details that are going to impact them at the work level and perhaps in their private lives. So lack of input into the decision-making process. What about working under dangerous conditions? Sometimes people have to do that. What about being insecure about your chance for advancement and knowing that you've gone so far on the totem pole and perhaps that's as high as you can go? How can I possibly advance to a new position, perhaps without changing departments? And what about bullying? Bullying is a real challenge. We hear about it a lot with kids, but it is also prevalent in the workplace. How many times have you thought about the concept of, oh my God, I don't want to turn my back? For sure there will be a knife in it. In every dysfunctional workplace, there is someone who bullies others. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that even within the healthcare community, nurses bully nurses. We used to say that nurses buried their young, that we don't have old nurses, you know, there's no such thing. We have seasoned professionals. Does that not sound amazing? So one of the more seasoned professionals would go up to a novice nurse, we call them novice to expert, and she would bully her or him. And the transparent response, the response that was developed by the National Student Nurses Association, is to look that person straight in the eye, make eye contact with them, and not say one word. Don't smile, don't have any expression whatsoever, but just stare them back. And when you stare them back, they pull back. They stop bullying, but it happens in almost every workplace. Perhaps you've thought at one time or another, I really don't like to work with that manager. I know that he has it out for me. I know that he's uncomfortable with me, and perhaps he's uncomfortable with me because he knows that I'm more qualified, or I know more about the topic at hand than he does. Another form of bullying is when you do your report and you turn it in, and it's an absolutely outstanding proposal, and then maybe your boss changes the cover sheet and takes it as his or her own. That's bullying. So when we start to think about the various ways in which one can be bullied in the workplace, it's intense. So take a look at this bit of humor, if you will. Is there light at the end of the tunnel, or is that really no more than a distress flare? Have we ever, at any time in our lives, felt a distress flare? I know that I have. In my work experience, I worked abroad for many, many years, and I had a great job, J-O-B, which some refer to as just over broke. But I was well paid for what I did, and I worked with amazing, amazing professionals. The downside, I had to work for 2 weeks out of every month in the former Soviet Union or in Central and Eastern Europe, and it took me 14 hours to go to work, changing planes to a less than desirable airline, which I often refer to as bring your own seatbelt, bring your own bolts to snap your chair to the floor, and perhaps aero flop, because you never quite knew if you were going to get there or not. But it was a great job because I worked with amazing people. The paradigm shifted so dramatically when management changed. And when management changed, and they said to me, after your 14-hour flight home, go home, take a shower, and come and sit in the office for 8 hours. And I looked and I said, for what? And they said, so that people will know that you're here and they can interact with you. But we all know that we were all interacting by email and by video and by webinar and lots of other ways to interact. And I included many of the staff members in my activities. I invited them to go to Russia. I invited them to go to Riga. I invited them to go to Almaty, Kazakhstan. I flew them all business class. I paid all of their expenses. What more could someone possibly want? That was, in fact, interaction at the highest level. So I ask you just for a moment to close your eyes and picture the impact on your body, your mind, your emotions, and your behavior of a dysfunctional workplace. What could that possibly do to you? How could that possibly make you feel? Do you go to work and you lose confidence? Do you somehow get hives when you're around certain people? Does your skin start to itch? Do you have itches in places you didn't even know existed, perhaps? How does that make you feel? Do you feel negative? Do you feel indecisive? Do you feel as if you cannot function through the rest of the day and get a thing done? Do you find that you drink more? And I'm not talking about water. Do you have trouble sleeping? Are you restless? If you have a smoking habit, does it become more intense? There are many, many ways. So think about for a moment your body as your team. There are 4 components to your team. They're physical, they're emotional, and they're more. Let's take them apart and talk first about the physical. The physical you, whether you like it or not, requires good nutrition. It requires you to feed it something. If you starve it and you put it into starvation or ketotic mode, it's not good for your body. So it demands that you have some sort of an appropriate weight. It doesn't mean skinny. It doesn't mean too heavy. It means an appropriate weight for your body. It means that you get some beneficial exercise, something that's good for you. I teach a class that's called Stay Fit As You Sit. You can actually exercise while you're on a conference call. You can have one of those stand-up desks that are so popular now, so that people are standing all day long and raising up and down on their toes and keeping their body moving. You can get chair massage in your office. There are so many things that you can do, but beneficial exercise and adequate rest. Well, let's talk about what's adequate. We're going to talk about sleep later on, but what is adequate for you might not be adequate for me. The National Sleep Foundation often says that 7.5 hours are enough for an average woman, but what's average? And that 8 hours is sufficient for an average man. But what does that mean? Does that mean, oh gosh, I think I'll get 2 hours now, and then I'll go do some work, and then I'll come back and get a couple of hours later, and then eventually, by the end of 24 hours, I'll have clocked in 7.5 hours. Is that what that means? Not at all. It means continuous rest that allows your body to debrief, if you will, to have a rest, a much needed rest. What about the emotional you? Sometimes our emotions run havoc. They run away with us. The emotional you needs to ask for and give forgiveness. It needs to have some form of an emotional release. It needs love and compassion. It needs to laugh periodically and have a good time. If you're not having fun, it doesn't count. Let's talk about fun for a moment. For many, many years, my family perceived me as having zero sense of humor. I think that on a scale of 0 to 100, I finally elevated to maybe about 20%. And why was that? I didn't seem to get a joke. I didn't seem to understand a thing. I was way off in some other world while they were discussing something else, and everyone saw the humor in the situation except me. And I was the matriarch. I had given birth to these 3 young people. How come they didn't get that I could actually laugh? And perhaps my husband was the worst. He too had a great sense of humor and thought that I had none. Well, eventually, and I'm not sure when it happened, and I'm not sure what that defining moment was, but I elevated myself to almost 75%. 75% for me is really, really good. And I can almost tell a joke, and it's a joke that they maybe haven't heard before, and I can have them crack a smile. So we need that. We need to experience joy. We need to experience happiness. We need to know that there is light at the end of the tunnel and that it's not a distress signal, and we need to have joyful relationships with others. I never had those joyful relationships when I was growing up. I wasn't that privileged. I came from a family that is so dysfunctional that I remember my daughter telling me that my family gave new meaning to the term dysfunctional. They were so bad. And I spent perhaps a lot of my time running away and trying to get away from them, and eventually I succeeded. But everyone needs to feel some sort of happiness and some joy just in surrounding themselves with people to whom they're important. So let's look at the other 2 members of your team. We have a mental you and we have a spiritual you. In your mind, think about it. Everybody needs a self-supportive attitude. Everybody needs positive thoughts. Everybody wants to feel as if whatever they're doing satisfies themselves as well as others. Because it's not all about pleasing the other person. Sometimes it's about you. And everybody needs some positive self-esteem, a positive self-image. I never had one because I grew up hearing, learn to type, you'll never amount to a, quote, thing. And I'll let you fill in the quote. I learned to type. In 3 weeks, I could type 150 words per minute and was asked to leave the class because I typed so much faster than the teacher. I was really good at typing. I had mastered it. What was I going to do next? I think often of a story of one of our grandsons when he was only 3 years old, and they were going on a Disney cruise, and they were going on a Disney cruise with their other grandparents. And so they were out on this boat, and it was lovely, and it was beautiful, and it was a gorgeous day, and it had a wonderful, wonderful rock wall. Wonderful rock wall. And our grandson wanted his dad, who's our son, to climb that rock wall. And he said, Daddy, Daddy, will you please climb the wall for me? I would love you to climb that wall for me. And our grandson, who we'll call Bill, but of course that's his name, said, Daddy, Daddy, you must do it right now. And our son looked at this little boy, and he looked at the wall, and he looked at the sea around him and started to think sharks and who knows whatever else is out there. And he thought, there is no way, I am too conservative, there is no way I'm going to climb that wall. But the little guy kept saying, Daddy, Daddy, please do it for me. And finally our son said, okay, I'm going to climb the wall. But he thought to himself, how can I climb the wall and ensure that I'm going to get back down safely? And what did he do? What any of us might do. He slipped a Spider-Man toy into his pocket. And he thought, Spider-Man? He climbs walls all the time. If he can get up there and get back down, surely he's going to help me. He'll be my buddy on this trip to the wall. So he climbed the wall and he got back down. His son is standing at the bottom of the wall saying, Daddy, Daddy, you did it. That was so great. I'm so excited. I'm so excited for you. Well, our ethical son is ready to say, let me tell you how I did it. And he's ready to pull Spider-Man out of his pocket. And he said, okay, Bill, let me share with you how I did that. I want you to know how it was possible. And did you think he was going to talk about Spider-Man, right? Instead, he said, What? What? Bill said, Daddy, Daddy, tell me how you did it. And then finally, hearing nothing and no response from his dad, Billy said, Daddy, I know how you did it. I know how you did it. You did it because you believed in yourself. So if you're 3 years old and you understand that if you believe in yourself, you can climb that highest wall, you can get back down safely, you can feel good, and with or without Spider-Man in your pocket, it's going to happen, that's huge. I never had that until I was nearly 20 years old. Never had that. I can't imagine having it at 3. What could my life have been like had I been able to believe in myself? So the spiritual you also has needs, and it needs inner calmness. It needs calm confidence. It needs to have a period in which, yes, you can relax, and yes, you can bring in all the things important to you, and yes, you can experience your creativity, and yes, you can trust in your own inner knowing, your own inner being. That's your team. Let's look at what health is all about. Health is so much more than the absence of disease. What do you think health is all about? Anybody want to jump and tell me what that is? What is health? Does anyone in this room experience health? Apparently not. What is health?
Well, it's a good place physically where you are not in disease. You are on the other side.
It's better to be on the other side. I always say I'm very grateful for every day I wake up on this side of the earth, because the other side is not looking too good. But health is so much more than the absence of disease. It's your responsibility. It's the small actions that you take. I always say to people, well-being doesn't start at the doctor's office. Contrary to popular belief, it starts with the small decisions that you and I make each day. When we shop for groceries, when we order food in a restaurant, when we make purchases, when we cook dinner. Perhaps your idea of dinner is something that comes out of a can or out of a frozen package. But there are so many small decisions that you and I make each and every day that can impact our health. And it depends on you and the stress-free environment that you have, that you create for your team, for those 4 aspects of your body that you provide for your most vulnerable commodity. What is that vulnerable commodity? The human body. We all started out on a relatively even playing field at birth, perhaps minus 1 or 2 congenital anomalies. But what you have done to your bodies in the name of growing older, growing better, growing wiser, growing taller, maybe growing shorter, maybe growing wider, has been impacted by your decisions and by your responsibility. So let's look at these 2 words, and they relate to stress. You can see the stem stress in them, distress or eustress. One is negative and one is positive. Think about your to-do list. How many of you have a to-do list? Everybody has a to-do list. We're so fancy now, we have them electronically. We have them with flags. We flag emails. We know things that need and require follow-up, and we're ready to do that. How many of you have ever looked at that to-do list and instead changed it to a must-do list? If you had a must-do list, how much smaller would that list be? There are lots of things that we can do. Many, many things that we can do. I recall a time working in the former Soviet Union when my colleagues would say to me, oh, Sharon, and they called me Sharonechka very favorably, I think, I hope. But they'd say to me, Sharon, just relax for a minute, just relax. Think about this. Everything is possible, but not everything is probable. So don't get upset if it doesn't go in your direction and it doesn't work for you. Anything is possible. So we know what distress is. We understand distress. Eustress is more like an opening. It's like an opportunity to really look at what it is we're thinking about and what's that cause of stress and spin it in a more positive way, looking at the positive aspects of what that might be. Eustress is what enables us to decide to run that marathon and to finish that marathon, to cross that finish line, to get where we need to be, to complete our goal, to learn what it is we need to do to be better and to feel better. Let's look at those 3 phases of stress. We agree that we've all experienced it at one time or another. There are 3 phases. First, there's an alarm. What's your first response when you hear an alarm? If you're driving, you look behind you and in front of you and perhaps to the side to see where that siren's coming from. You want to get out of the way. You want to practice safely and move over. What else is an alarm? What creates an alarm?
Reaction.
A reaction to something? What might that reaction be?
Tense. You're going to tense up.
You're going to tense up. Okay, what else?
You're going to become more alert.
You'll become more alert, or you hope you're more alert
Yeah,
at that
you are,
time.
right.
You're going to respond to the stressor. You're going to react. And the second phase of stress is resistance. It's resistance. You're going to adapt to the stressor. If you're in the vehicle, you're going to pull over. If it's something that's going on in your home, you're going to assess the situation, or in your schoolroom, or in your classroom, or with your family, figure out what needs to be done and respond appropriately. But the last phase of stress is perhaps the most important, and that is exhaustion. When your ability to resist is reduced to the point where you are no longer functional, you are exhausted. How does that happen? I'll give you a good example. When I was working in the former Soviet Union, I worked 100 hours a week. For the same money, by the way. And that was only my half-time job. I was subcontracted to the US government for 50 hours a week, but of course they made me work 100. And then when I wasn't working for them, I was still working my real job, which took me to Australia and to Cape Verde, West Africa, and to other places unknown to me previously, but wonderfully, wonderfully brilliant places with great people. But I was working a lot of hours. And eventually an alarm went off that said to me, what on earth are you doing to yourself? How can you possibly be engaged with your family and with the people in your life and enjoy life and have a good time, even though you have wonderful colleagues all over the world? How can you possibly keep this up? Well, let me tell you something. You can work and you can pull a 24-hour and you can work 3 to 4 days without any sleep, and that works until maybe you're like 35 or 40. But when you get to be 50 and you do that, it no longer works. An alarm goes off inside you that says, what on earth are you doing to me? I am your precious commodity. I am vulnerable and you are killing me. And eventually you recognize the fact that you can do that up to a certain point, but you cannot do it for the rest of your life, especially if you plan to increase your family in the form of little people known as grandchildren. It doesn't work that way. And you're so emotionally, physically, mentally exhausted that you cannot do another thing. And that's when people collapse and have to take a week off. And often that week off is not a week off, but a week in a hospital that they spend at the will of others trying to determine what's wrong with them, when in essence, if they gave a true iteration of what they had been doing to themselves, people would be able to figure out what was wrong with them. So let's revisit what we talked about in the beginning of this session when we talked about the 3 greatest sources of your stress. We talked about work, we talked about family, we talked about people, we talked about money. Money is always a big source of stress. How has that changed as you've listened to me talk about what stress truly is? Do you still have perhaps those same 3 great sources? Or have you added so many that you now have 6? Or have you decreased your list so that perhaps you're down to 1 and you've identified that as money is the root of all evils. Money is the thing that causes me not to be able to put food on the table, that relates to the fact that I lost my job, that relates to the fact that I'm underpaid for what I do, that impacts my family and that impacts my relationships. So how have those sources of your stress changed, or have they changed at all? Think about that. Let's look at the symptoms of stress. I'm sure you have experienced some of these symptoms at one time or another. Have you ever felt sad? And I'm not talking about sadness at a movie that makes everyone around you cry, or perhaps you're like me and no one else is crying except for me. At funerals, yes. At weddings, what? And at movies, regardless of what that movie is about. It could be Night at the Museum, and I'm still tearful. Everyone at one time or another has felt sad. Have you ever felt depressed? What is depression? Have you ever felt withdrawn? Sometimes that depression, and I could be speaking to the choir right here, sometimes that depression is so overwhelming. And there was an interesting article in yesterday's Time magazine that talked about the concept of stress versus depression. And is depression depression, or is it just a response to the stressors in one's environment? I had a wonderful nephew, and I say that in past tense. He was a delightful young man who was a partner at a major law firm in Seattle. He had been depressed off and on, according to my sister, since he was maybe 12 years old. He had a wonderful life. He was a graduate of Cornell Law School. He worked in Beijing for many years, setting up the Chinese practice for his office. He spoke fluent Mandarin. He was a brilliant scholar, a lovely young man, married to a beautiful girl, and they had 2 young kids who at the time were 4 and 1. And that was the time at which Matt committed suicide. Off and on, he'd been on drugs for many, many years. And one day he came home with a gun, and his wife said to him, "Matt, don't do that to us." And so what did he do? Did he return the gun? No, he went to a motel and he shot himself in the head. What about mental confusion and memory changes? I'm not talking about the memory changes that we all feel when we get up and we say, "Where on earth did I leave my keys?" I still remember my son once when he was a little kid, and we lived in New Jersey, and I couldn't find the car keys, and they were totally missing, and my husband and I were looking all over the house for these car keys. Where could they possibly be? And I opened the fridge to get a drink, and I looked in the side door, and there were the keys, and he had put the keys in the fridge. Why not? That makes perfect sense to me. I'm not sure. It obviously made perfect sense to him. So I'm not talking about those memory changes. I'm not talking about the memory changes that have precipitated the development of a memory care center on almost every street corner where we live. When we moved here 30 years ago, there were banks on every street corner, and now you see memory care centers opening. What does that say about our population and about our future and about what we face, not only as we get older and better, but as life goes on? All of us have periods of confusion at one time or another, and they often happen when we're overstressed, when we're overworked, when we're underslept, when we're unrested, when we're dehydrated. We forget certain things. What about other things like eating or sleeping habits? What about periodic headaches? Think about young people in school. And they go to school in the first semester, they gain 20 pounds because the food is all good, and it's of course all junk food, but it's good, and there's a lot of camaraderie and a lot of interaction with their colleagues, and they're loving it, and they gain a few pounds. And then they decide to be on a diet, but they go from top to bottom. And suddenly we have kids who are anorexic. And what do we do with that? And what about the ones who don't sleep all night because they have to prepare for an exam the next day? I remember even far back in my 3-year initial nursing program, I had a roommate whose clock went off at midnight, and she woke up when everybody else was going to sleep. And Nancy was an absolute gem. We've been friends for 40 years. She's an absolute gem. But I would do my homework, and I would get my stuff ready for the next day, and I had my uniform laid out, and everything was ready to go. And I was ready to hop into bed, and she was starting to wash her hair, and then she was going to do something to her face. I'm not quite sure at that time in my life what it was, but it looked pretty exotic. And then she was going to start studying. And then she went to bed from 4 to 6, and then she got up to be on the floors to go to work at 7. And she interrupted my sleep cycle. You can be sure that at the end of the first year, I switched roommates. There was no way that I could go through 3 years of that. So headaches, sleep disorders, all kinds of things. Think about what your body truly needs, the first of which is nutrition for the mind. You are who you surround yourself with. You are what you read. You are what and who you listen to. Think about your own personal and professional growth and the fact that you owe it to yourself to surround yourself with positive thoughts and good people, because at times our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame with us. Albert Schweitzer. Profound words then, and even more profound now. Think about what you can do. You should strive to balance your physical, your emotional, your mental, and your spiritual aspects of your body. You should develop, establish respectful, cooperative, collegial relationships with others, with people in your community, with your family and your friends, and sometimes family is the most difficult. Some people's families don't speak to them. There were many, many years when I always felt like the last one out. I remember one time I had one sister in Philadelphia and another sister in Florida, and they were all going to meet in Philadelphia for somebody's wonderful lifetime experience. And I wasn't invited. I lived in Chicago. Did they not invite me because I was on the other side? I'm not quite sure what. And one of my sisters, and there are 3 of them, found out that I would be in the area because I was going to someone else's event. And they were all having dinner at one sister's house. And I was told to ask one sister, to ask the other sister, if I could please be invited. And I thought, what? What kind of a family are you? Why would I even want to eat with you people? You're all crazy. And it wasn't that, but I felt so not a part of a family unit that had 5 kids, and we all should have liked one another. At some point in our lives, you would think by the time we grow up a little, we would get over that and we would bridge that gap and we would play nice and be kind to one another. So it's important to gather information and to make informed decisions, wellness-oriented choices. We'll talk a little bit more about habits and choices, and to actively participate in your health decisions that impact you. How many times do you go to WebMD or to some other Google site before you would go to a doctor or before you would call for licensed medical advice? We all do that. People go to the doctor now and they've got everything all printed out. They understand every sign and symptom. When I was in school, if somebody presented with some symptoms and you went back to the dorm and you had the same symptoms, for sure, you had some terrible disease that was going to overcome you because you had the same symptoms as that patient. People in medical school feel the same thing. But each of us sometimes, we go to the internet, we Google something, we see what it says, and we think, oh my heavens, is that going to happen to me? Is the outcome so bad? Is this going to be my demise? But you have to actively participate in your health decision and healing process. I want to tell you that when I first moved here, there was still a period of time 30 years ago when people thought that God or whomever you worship came with a white lab coat and a stethoscope around his or her neck. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true. It wasn't true 30 years ago, and it surely is not true now. We need to intimately be a part of that process. And now let's look at adaptogenicity. What is adaptogenicity besides a great big word? If you take it apart and you look at the first 5 letters that say adapt, you get it. It's your body's ability to deal with the stressors that you create, with the stressors in your environment. The body can, in fact, be quite adaptogenic, but it needs you to make the right decisions about whole foods and about sleep and about rest and about hydration that will enable it to adapt to its environment. And when you deal with stress, all of these pressures seem so nominal. When your body adapts appropriately, it doesn't seem to be such a big deal. One of my favorite authors is Napoleon Hill, and I've loved everything that he's ever written. I love looking at the concept of greener pastures. We've all thought the grass is greener on the other side of the street. That person has a better job than me. That person has a better car than me. That person has a better life than me, and I grew up thinking that. But what about his theory of life's little lessons? What are those little lessons? Well, be grateful for the good things in life. I already shared with you, I'm grateful every day that I get up on this side of the earth. It's going to be another great day. Be grateful for the people who are in your life. Be thankful for all that you have while you still continue to pursue all that perhaps you want/need. And that reminds me of another story. I remember my grandson, who at this point is 9 years old, saying, I have 2 birthday lists. One of them is what I need, and one of them is what I want. Which list would you like to choose from? Well, obviously, as a grandparent, I'd like to choose everything on both lists, but that's not quite possible. Until you specifically ask, tell me what it is. Tell me what makes that I need list so important to you. Why haven't the needs moved over to the wants? Or why haven't the wants moved over to the needs? How do you differentiate that list and tell me what it is you really, really want that hopefully you also need? Some things will be subsumed on both lists. It needs to happen. So focus on what you want in life and act as if it's already happened. When you express your affirmation or your gratitude statement, it's always, I'm so happy and I'm so grateful now that I have done thus and such. And now that I'm at this point in my life, and now that I have such joy and such abundance. And abundance can be in the form not of money. It could, of course, be play money with one of my grandchildren who likes his own face on the money. But it could be the abundance of people who have brought joy into your life. the relationships that you develop, the wonderful family members. Read that statement. Establish the date when something is going to happen, and read that statement to yourself each and every day. Make that a life lesson for yourself, and be grateful for your health. Stress busters enable us to manage stressors. They enable them to break them down into nominal things that perhaps impact us in positive ways or in negative ways, but don't overwhelm us. Immune boosters, be more optimistic about the outcomes that you'll face, about what's going on in your life. Think of the glass as being half full instead of half empty. Don't think like my colleagues in the former Soviet Union who would say to me, Sharon, relax, everything is possible. Not everything is probable. I was thinking probable means it will happen. If somebody said to me the grand opening will be on your birthday and we'll get it all going, and a week before the birthday the walls were still missing, I wasn't quite sure that that was often going to happen. But I started to think about positive thoughts. What about adversity and a sense of belonging? When you look at what happened on 9/11, when you look at the Boston Marathon, you see that when terrible, terrible things happen that should impact us in a very negative way, they bring a sense of community. They bring a sense of belonging. They mobilize the forces so that people are all thinking of the same thing, working toward the same goal, moving in that same direction, and being one. Let's look from a health standpoint at stress and cholesterol levels. Anybody here have a cholesterol level? Because the manufacturers of statin drugs believe that every person over age 40 should be taking a statin drug. What will that do to their bottom line? What will that do to their numbers? Great things. What will that do to the rest of us? From a standpoint of leg cramps and other problems, I can't even imagine the number of side effects, the number of consequences. It's a cry for help. But what happens is when you have stress in your body, when you have stress in your mind, when you have stress in those 4 components that we talked about that were your internal team, you increase your lipid level. You increase your cholesterol level. You have an inflammatory response in your body, and when you have inflammation in your body, that's when you have that dis-ease that we talked about earlier. So if you can keep your body from being too inflamed and from being too annoyed from all the stressors in your life, you can help to maintain those levels. I had a very high cholesterol level at age 20. It was 400. It was off the charts. I thought it was genetic. Part of it probably was. But a great deal of it, now that I think about it, could be attributed to the stress that was in my life. So you need to be the captain of your own ship. And if this is my ship, I am, in fact, in charge. I'm responsible for those 4 areas in my team. We're all familiar with the miracle on the Hudson. We're all familiar with the U.S. Airlines pilot named Sully, who somehow landed that plane on the water and saw lots of people get to safety. Not only was he the captain of that ship, but when he speaks and when he presents to others, he talks about the fact that he's the captain of his own body. He makes sure that he eats well. He makes sure that he exercises. He makes sure that he's hydrated. And I don't mean with a pint. He makes sure that he's hydrated. And he also makes sure that he gets adequate rest. He's the captain of his own ship. And each and every one of you can be the captain of your ship as well. You're the one responsible for the decisions that only you can make that will impact your ability to be well and to do well and to stay well. But you're in charge. I never really thought about that much. I thought about the fact that 30% of who and what you are is genetic, and that 70% is the environment with which you surround yourself. But now, changes in the literature and in new citations tell us that that's not quite true. Yes, a certain amount is genetic. Yes, a certain amount is environmental. The rest is pretty much either up to you or up to chance. And there was a great article in this week's Time magazine that also talked about chance and what that means. Who gets cancer and who does not? Is it chance, or is it the behaviors that you've practiced your entire life? So I ask you to be a participant in your life, not a spectator. Don't sit on the sidelines. Don't sit on the sidelines. Don't sit on the sidelines, unless, of course, you're at a Wolves game. Don't sit on the sidelines. Otherwise, be a participant in life. Be a participant in your own life. And I reiterated that statement multiple times because sitting on the sidelines doesn't get the job done. It might surround you with wonderful people. You might meet new people. I mean, a great opportunity to network and to meet others. But it doesn't get the job done. What gets the job done is realizing that nobody's life is perfect. In any room at any time, if you talk to people about their childhood or how life was when they were growing up, not everybody is the Brady Bunch. It doesn't work that well. It's not that way in life, where perhaps two blended families are all going to get along with a nominal amount of arguments, but people are pretty much going to be together. We all have difficult situations. If you talk to your colleagues, to your family, to your friends, everyone has faced something at one time or another. Life is not a bed of roses. Everyone has experienced some level of stress at one time or another. Some people's lives seem to work better than others. When I was growing up, I thought everybody's life worked better than my own. And how fast could I get out of that place and start a whole new life for myself? We've all thought that at one time or another. Not everybody grew up in a typical family, whatever typical is these days. Not everybody had all the money that they needed, or food on the table, or transportation, or two parents working, or somebody with a good job, or didn't, perhaps was raised in a single family home, a single parent home. Some people's lives always seem to work better than others. Be respectful of that, admire it, but create your own by being a participant. Have you ever wondered why you thought their lives were better than your own? Have you ever thought about what made their lives different? Were they all born with silver spoons in their mouths? I think not. Were some people born with loving, wonderful families? I think yes. Were some people born into a family in which the people actually still talk to one another? I think yes. And perhaps were some people born into families where people went their own ways, but then came back together? I think yes. It's not the same for everyone. You need to be your own cheerleader on your own team. So think about yourself and self-care. We teach self-care a great deal to those in the medical professions because typically nurses and others don't take good care of themselves. Can you work an extra shift? Of course I can. Well, you're already here for 10 hours. Would you mind staying for 16? Of course not. I'm happy to do it. Can you work 5 days in a row like that? 12 or 16 hours a day? Of course I can. And typically when nurses want more money, what do? They not only add more shifts, they add another employer. How toxic is that? I recently had an experience working with somebody in a rehab center where the staff that worked there for 12 hours was leaving there and going to their next job that was going to be 12 hours. And you wondered how efficient they could possibly be during the day when they were taking care of your loved one if they truly weren't with the program. They were not there. How could that happen? So assume responsibility for you and create for yourself a healing environment. Read and interpret the signals that your body gives to you. And think about this statement from Margaret Fuller, who says that men, for the sake of living, forget to live. Do you have a life, or are you living? Having a life is so much better. It is so much more engaging. It is so much more rewarding than just living and moving from one day to the next day and just getting by. That is so critical. So let's look at your body's perception of who and what you are and what in fact you've done to it. How does that impact you? How does that affect your ability to be well and to stay well? To your body, stress is synonymous with change. I'm sure many of you, if I ask you to raise your hands, have read the book, Who Moved My Cheese? By Spencer. It's a great book. We actually had it translated once into Russian to use for our NIS and CEE programs. It's an amazing book in any language. Trust me, it's an amazing book. You're preparing for change. The cheese disappears. Where's my next mountain of cheese? How big will that mountain of cheese be, and how fast can I get there? Your body is going to respond to the stress that comes with the lack of cheese. Lack of cheese, lack of money, lack of food, lack of a place to sleep, lack of education, lack of something. Anything that causes a change in your life, whether it's good or bad, causes stress. anything, no matter what it is. It can be the birth of a child. It can be the death of a family member. It can be illness. It can be a job change. It causes stress, good or bad. It's there. So when you find your dream apartment and you get ready to move, that's stress. Am I going to move myself, or am I going to depend upon movers who perhaps might break things in the process? How much furniture will they drop and how much will need to be replaced? How much insurance could I buy, or do they really act and act out the way that they say that they do? If you break your leg, that's stress. How am I going to walk? Oh my heavens, I broke my right leg. How am I going to drive? What's going to happen if it snows? How fast can we hold the snow off? Or shall I just go someplace nice and warm for the whole winter and not have to deal with this? Good or bad, it's a change in your life. And it's stress to your body. That's your body's perception. So let's look at that environment in which we live and in which we work. Let's look at workplace stress. We all have workplace stress, even those of us who work for ourselves. Do we have a great boss? You can bet on having a great boss. Is anybody going to give you a bad evaluation? Perhaps maybe your clients, but your boss is not going to evaluate you poorly. Is anyone going to give you a raise? Yes, I'm the boss. I can give myself a raise whenever I choose to. I don't know if there's any money to support that raise, but yes, I can give myself a raise. Is anyone going to say no to you when you want to take a day off or have a vacation? Absolutely not. That's why so many people are entrepreneurs and really love to work for themselves. There's the spirit of the entrepreneur in each and every one of us. It eliminates a lot of the stressors that usually are attached to a job. But it's also important to have a healing environment where when you work, you don't think, oh my heavens, I can't take that for one more minute. My head is bursting. I need to put it down on top of my computer, which by the way is also toxic because all the toxicity is coming from that computer into your brain, making your headache so much worse and creating so much more stress. I need to go to the restroom for a while just to hang out. Maybe it's a private one and I can lock myself in it for a while and nobody will find me. They'll think that I'm taking my biological break, but I'm not. I'm actually hiding out. It's the only place to go because the rest of the office is all cubicles. There is no private space, no downtime, nothing. What is that kind of an environment? Do the people I work with support me as a professional and who I am and what I do? Do they think that I add value to the organization, or are they ready to go and get my job? We talked about it earlier. We'll talk about it again. The environment in which you work, in which you place your team or your body, is so critical to its ability to deal better with stress, to deal with change, to feel well, and to be well. It is so critical. So think about our environment, the one in which we live, in which we work, and hopefully in which we play. We need to create some sense of balance. I never thought about balance when I was working 100 hours a week. It never occurred to me until one day I had this aha moment. Oh my heavens, what was that? I realized that I was going to be a grandparent. And if I was going to be a grandparent, I could either have no relationship with that future child, or I could have a really good one. And if I was going to have a really good one, I could either have one in which that child pushed me in a wheelchair because I had destroyed myself so intensely from my crazy work schedule, my stressful work schedule, or I could get on the floor and play and get back up again. And I chose the latter because it sounded like a whole lot more fun. So we need to be able to live, we need to be able to work, and we need to be able to have fun, to generate that sense of humor, to have a good time, to know that we're really grateful for being where we are and being in an environment that supports all of that. Many of us don't have work-life balance. On the corporate level, a lot of people have very successful employee assistance programs that are being called on more than ever before to provide the resources that people need to deal with workplace-related stress, depression, confusion, financial, all kinds of problems, no matter what they are. But those programs are being called on more than ever before on a global scale to allow people to reach that level of balance that they need between their work and between their life. They need to be able to live, but they need to be able to have a life. Having a life is truly valuable. So let's look at the cost factors. This program was called The Wages of Stress. It plays a cost. Stress plays a cost to your family, What does it do to your family when you're never home? When you leave in the morning and it's dark and you come home and your kids are already in bed, what does that say about who's important in your life? How does that destroy and impact that relationship? Relationships that you had in college or when you were growing up, you had friends with whom you used to hang out after school or after work. You used to be able to take in a movie or to take in a game or to play cards or to do something. Even if it was just having a running buddy, you used to be able to do something, but you're so stressed now that you can do nothing. Those relationships suffer. We talked about your health. What is the impact on your health? Trust me, it's serious. It's serious on all 4 components of your body. And what about performance and work demands? We mentioned briefly the workload. There are less people doing the work, but there's still that big pile of work to be done. And who has to do it? The people who are lucky enough to be left behind. The people who are lucky enough to still have a job, to still have something to do, to still get that paycheck. What about conflict in the workplace? Is everyone with whom you've ever worked your best friend forever? Are they all people you'd like to invite to your family events and to wonderful opportunities to share and to vacation and to do other things? Or are they people who you think, gosh, when it comes to Friday, I am so glad I don't need to see that person again until Monday morning. And even then it will be a push. Maybe I'll get a trip. Maybe I'll travel somewhere and I'll have something to do. Maybe it'll be like me one day. I was leaving on a Monday morning and I didn't know if I was going to Tashkent, Uzbekistan or to Boston, Massachusetts. But I was ready to go no matter where it was. My suitcase was packed and I was ready to go there. Maybe it's juggling time. How many hours in a day do you have? We know that we all have the same 24. Why do some people look as if they've made their 24 into 36 or 48? And others of us struggle with just 8 hours of work and think, what else can I possibly get done in the remaining number of hours? We're all juggling time. We have to because our plates are so full. Remember, the plate was the size of this room, that we have to be able to do that. And what about lack of job security? You go to work and you think, is today the day? Will next week? Gee, I've heard that people really only get fired on Wednesdays. That's the best day of the week for the person being fired. And it's also the best day of the week for the organization because they don't have to go through a whole week, if they fired people on Monday, of dealing with the repercussions. Midweek seems to be best. We'll lay off those people on Wednesday. So, okay, I made it through Monday and Tuesday. I had a really good start to my week. What's Wednesday going to be like? Will that be the day in which I get that little pink slip or that email or that text? Will that be the magic bullet? No, I think not. And then you finally make it through Thursday and Friday, and you start the next week in the same cycle, the same way. How secure is my job? Look at the pension programs in this state alone. How secure is my future? How secure is my pension? What is it going to take now that I'm going to live older and longer? Do I want to live well or do I want to fall apart? So let's look at the concept of healthcare costs. Presenteeism. I touched on it briefly when I talked about the fact that I might be a nurse and be responsible for 2 patients. The school calls and says, my kid's sick. Where's my mindset? Where's my head at that moment? How many people have you ever worked with in your work environment who are physically taking up space, inhaling air, perhaps taking a break, but doing nothing? They're like warm bodies. Many, many people would be willing to say, I'd rather have a warm body than nobody. But what good is that warm body that's taking up space and doing nothing? They're not present in the moment. They're not contributing to the outcomes. They're not contributing to the bottom line. They are simply taking up space. And by the way, they could also be picking up a paycheck that somebody who is willing to work and willing to do what it takes could be getting. So there are all kinds of issues related to the presenteeism place. For many of us, like in healthcare, like firemen, like policemen, like other service officers, there are people who work in situations in which somebody has to cover 24/7, 365. They're not jobs where people work 9 to 5 and then go home, or 8 to 4 and then go home. Those places are open for business all the time. They are there to serve. But if you're impaired, how much are you contributing? If you have an impaired captain on the plane on which you're a passenger, how happy would you be if you knew about the level of impairment? How is that going to make you feel? So there are many, many situations in many, many types of jobs all over the world in which being present is a critical moment when it comes to outcomes, when it comes to results, when it comes to value. And what about coping? Just coping, dealing with the healthcare costs. The healthcare costs associated with stress-induced illnesses is intense. As a matter of fact, a very reliable academic source, I think you know it as WebMD, says that 75 to 90% of physician office visits are related to stress-induced symptoms. If we could get rid of that stress and rid of some of those symptoms, what would that do to our symptoms? So a lot of it is just coping, putting money into a healthcare system that is already drained. There are so many people under the Affordable Care Act who cannot afford care and who choose to opt out and pay a fine simply because the cost is so high. So let's look at ways in which we can reduce that stress. My favorite is forest bathing. It has nothing to do with bathing. It has nothing to do with water. It does have to do with being in a forest. Think about how you feel when you take a long walk in the woods. How refreshing the air is to breathe. How good your body feels because you're putting it to work doing what it was naturally meant to do. How refreshing that entire cycle is. When I worked in the former Soviet Union, a lot of my colleagues went out to their country houses to walk in the forest and pick mushrooms on the weekends. They were always inviting me to join them, and several times I took advantage of the opportunity because my apartment in the city, if I opened the windows, all I smelled was soot and dirty air. How much more refreshing would it be to go out to the countryside? So to go out to the countryside with people who are just meandering through the forest, breathing good air, feeling good, having a great day, perhaps cooking outside, was so, so refreshing. What about deep breathing? You can do that yourself without being in a forest. Inhale through your nose, hold it for a second or so, and then exhale through your mouth. Just practicing deep breathing makes you feel great. What about meditation? I always say that meditation is so much better than medication. When you meditate, you're thinking about the value that life offers you, about how good things are and how good they're going. You understand that meditation is good. When you think about medicate, you think conversely about side effects. And sometimes the side effects are worse than the disease that they're treating. What about simple exercise, rotating your ankle in what we call soccer rounds? From my playing soccer days as an adult, that's a whole other story. What about eating well? Making the right choices. Eating, if you must, 3 to 5 small meals a day, but eating on a regular basis and making good choices that don't equate to fast food. What about getting a decent night's sleep? How would that make you feel? It's so interesting to me that we spend 1/3 of our lives in bed, yet 70% of people all over the world have a sleep challenge of one kind or another. Why is that? Why are they not getting a restful sleep? Is it because they have their cell phone under their pillow? Because they're afraid to miss a text, not realizing that they're frying their brains at the same time? Is it because there's a smart meter on their outside wall and they're worried about the ramifications of living too close to the smart meter or less than 40 miles to the cell tower? There are so many ways in which we can impact our sleep. Is it because they eat too late at night and then have to take an antacid before they go to bed? Because they'll be up all night because they've eaten within 3 hours of the time that it's time to go to bed. What about the concept of a power nap? This has been a huge discussion in the healthcare community. If they have a nurse working a 12 to 16-hour shift, should they give him or her 15 minutes off to go to a quiet space and take a nap for 15 or 20 minutes? What will that do to them? How will that make them feel? There's a lot to be said for taking a power nap. So let's try one of these stress reducers. Let's all take a nap. I'm not asking you to fall asleep in the middle of my presentation. I'm just asking you, can you relax? Relax, loosen up. Don't sit so tight in your chairs, just relax. Now I'm asking you to imagine. Imagine what it would be like if there were no snow on the ground today. If the outside temperature was 65 to 75 degrees, and guess what? The sun was shining. We got those wonderful far infrared rays, the good rays from the sun, that made us all feel well. Imagine what life would be like if you just got a huge promotion. Your income this year was going to be 30 or 40% more than it was last year. Your family was all physically well. Your car worked. It didn't get stuck on the highway somewhere. And the tires weren't flat. Commit to yourself You're going to take a moment, 15 to be sure, 15 minutes of your time to relax each day, to imagine how great life is, to commit to having it be even better for those around you, and to awake feeling truly, truly refreshed. Can you put a note on your door that says power napping, come back in 15 minutes? I think not. You can do it when you're your own boss, at your own place, or in your own house if you have a home-based business, yes. But I think that it wouldn't go over too well in the workplace, although in the healthcare communities, it seems to be doing quite well. Then I ask you to prioritize and learn to say no. I alluded to this earlier in our discussion. No is a complete sentence. Knowing when to say no, knowing when to say, I would love to help you, I'm so honored that you asked. I'm unable to do so, or I can, but up to this level, and then can you find someone else? Know your limitations and be nice to yourself. Recognize the need for help. Recognize when you need help. When you say, I can't do this anymore, or I'm stuck on some Excel program, who can I ask who's an expert? And then you call one of your kids because you know that they're experts at everything. Seek help when you know it, when you need it, and know when to seek that help. Know how and when to communicate the need and to just say, I've reached the end of my rope. I've gone this far. I need some help with this project or with this task or with these hours or with this shift. Can you help me? Know when it's okay to say no. And also know when it's okay to just do nothing. Have you ever been sitting in a room with somebody in your house and they're very still and very quiet? And you'll say, what are you doing? And if they're not asleep and you haven't woken them up in the process, they might say, I'm doing nothing. And I might think, how can you possibly sit there and do nothing? What's that all about? What do you mean you're doing nothing? Is your mind not racing 100 miles an hour doing something else? No, it's okay to do nothing because we all read Pooh's little instruction book. Everybody knows Winnie the Pooh. He was a master. Don't underestimate the value of doing nothing, of just going along, listening to all the things you can't hear, and not bothering about them at all. It's okay to do nothing. So let's look at solutions then. A lot of workplaces have incorporated stress management programs. A lot of them are working on work-life balance initiatives. For those in the insurance industry, I'm sure that you see this. You see people beefing up their workplace balance programs, their wellness, if you will, programs. And I say, if you will, because to me, wellness was always the label on my dog's food. It was called wellness. I thought that if you eat this food, you're going to be truly well. Truthfully, I contemplated sampling it myself to seeing if that would be the magic thing for me. Obviously, I didn't do it, and I don't think it would have been. A lot of people are very happy to take a cup of hot water, put a little lemon in it, relax, and just drink it. That does amazing things to the body's immune system and to the mental attitude. What about yoga? What about relaxation? In one of my places of employment, we always had chair massage on Fridays and on Wednesdays. And there was a long wait list for those chair massages. People signed up 2-3 weeks in advance, and everybody loved it. Because for 25 minutes, you didn't have to do a thing except be in your work area and have a massage. How relaxing is that? With one of my clients at UCLA Ronald Reagan Medical Center, they have a program called Urban Zen. And it was based on a program that Donna Karan had started in Boston. And in that program, everybody at every level in the organization, that means physical therapy and janitorial staff and others, come in 30 minutes early and have a yoga Zen session with exercise. The exercise is not going to be physical exercise that made them need to go home and take a shower in between, but simple things like rotating your ankles or stretching your legs or doing some simple stretching, drinking water, hydrating, making yourself feel well. And guess what? They come to work early and they get paid. When they start their day, when they start their shift, they're in a great mindset to do great things. Identify the root cause of your stress. Find out what it is and try to minimize whatever it is as much as possible so that you can have one of these solutions. You all know the word resilience. When you think about resilience, you think about an elastic or a rubber band. You think about pulling it and having it snap back. You think about a slingshot, the same type of an activity. But resilience is not only snapping back, but working through whatever that challenge was, getting rid of that stressor in your environment so that you can, in fact, be well. Think about Rocky. As many times as he was knocked to the ground, he bounced himself right back again so that he could parade those steps at the Philadelphia Art Institute, and we could all hear that wonderful song. What about sports teams? They bounce back. Perhaps it's not in the first period, perhaps it's not in the second, but the third is a winner. It may be too late from a standpoint of the score, but you've seen them bounce back. What about politicians? They go to jail, they go to prison, they go here, they go there, they go to what we sometimes affectionately call camp, not to be seen for 4 to 6, maybe 10 years, but they bounce back and come back and run for office. Does it matter what their past was or where they were? No, they reinvent themselves. And what about you? Have you ever had the opportunity to also bounce back? What about between breaths? Think about between breaths. Sometimes the most important thing in a whole day is the rest that we take between those 2 deep breaths. If we don't do that and we don't take care of the situation and be good to ourselves, who in fact is going to be good for us? So think about what will work for you and 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 for those of you seated in the back. What will work for you? Do you know how to relax? Focus intently on anything that relaxes you. What brings me the greatest joy is getting another cute picture of my adorable grandchildren. We all have adorable grandchildren. It doesn't matter. They're all adorable, right? Focus on breathing. Focus on visualizing something that is so relaxing. Think about the last time you went to the dental office. The trauma that comes from sitting in that chair, and I hope there are not too many dentists in the group. Think about the trauma that's associated with being in that chair. I know that many years ago we went to a dentist, and it was in New Jersey, and he had wonderful pictures of islands and palm trees all over the ceiling. And so when you were in that chair, all you could think about was, gosh, I surely wish that I was there, or how fast can I get on a plane and go to that nice warm place, especially in the winter. How much fun would that be? So focus on something good, on what you see, on what you hear, on what you feel, and on what you smell. Use all of your senses. So what are the tips and techniques that I leave you with? Set aside 20 to 30 minutes of your day on an empty stomach and play some relaxing music. It can be so relaxing. It doesn't matter what kind. What's relaxing to you might not be what's relaxing to me at all, but it might be relaxing. It might work. Sit upright with your spine straight and both feet planted on the floor. Lie down if necessary to take that perhaps power nap. Deep breathe for a minute or two until your body relaxes and until you feel and experience you. And push away those distracting thoughts. Forget about woe is me. Forget about how the glass is half empty. Push those out of your mind. Just relax for a total of 20 minutes or start with 5 and please work up to it. You can even set an alarm for 25 minutes in case you overrun, in case you're so relaxed that there's no way that you're ever going to stop relaxing, and eliminate those stressors. And gently return your focus to the present and stretch before you get up. Do deep breathing while you're driving to work. It's simple to do. That's not called multitasking. That's called actually breathing. You're doing it, but do it well. Get up 15 minutes earlier and spend time doing stretching or relaxation or yoga or something. Take 2 minutes a couple of times a day to tense those tight muscle groups for 10 to 15 seconds and then just relax them. Take a 15 to 20 minute walk. I see people all the time in the suburbs walking on the campuses of their offices, just going out and taking a walk, perhaps instead of a coffee break, sometimes perhaps instead of a heavy lunch. Get out of your chair at least once an hour. If you're in the kind of an environment in which you sit all day, the only thing that's going to happen from that is just your cheeks are going to spread. And they'll align with and match the configuration of your chair. You don't want to do that. And rid yourself of excuses by coming equipped for work. Have a pair of tennis or running shoes in your drawer. Have a raincoat. Have an umbrella. So that there's no excuse, no more excuses for doing what you need to do. And finally, do the choices that you make every day get you what you want. Think about it. How do you spend your time? If you answered no, congratulations. Because you've identified areas in your life that you may want to change. And that can be valuable information that you need to have, especially as we begin a new year and a new you. So think about it. Do you confidently find solutions to the challenges in your life? Do you figure it'll work out? It'll go away? Because guess what? It's not going anywhere unless you find a place to put it. It's like reorganizing the clutter in your closet. It doesn't go anywhere unless you put it someplace where it's not going to be found. And usually that place where it's not going to be found is a circular container with an open top. Do you feel valued and do you feel appreciated by your family, by your friends, by your relationships in the workplace? Do you appreciate others and let them know how much you love and appreciate them? I think that many years ago I learned a lesson when a dear friend passed that I hadn't ever said how important that person was to me in my life, and I hadn't taken the time to do it. And often when we do it, it is far too late. It is at somebody's eulogy, it's at somebody's wake, it's at something else. And do you have a circle of warm, caring friends, even if that circle of warm, caring friends is your spouse, your partner, your kids, your grandkids? They can also be your friends. So don't change your habits, just change your choices. Don't snack on junk food. My kids once told me that I individually, single-handedly, made Snickers the best-selling candy bar in America. That I had done it all by myself by visiting that candy machine every single day for 10 years. Avoid sodas and avoid unhealthy coffee. Make healthy meal choices that are stress-free choices, that are going to invigorate you, that are apples or fruit or carrots or something else. Odors influence our well-being. Sometimes we hear about people who feel fine when they're at home, and then they go to work and they feel terrible. I know when we pick up our UPS mail, it's in a place directly next to a Subway restaurant. And if we come in on the weekends and I unlock the door to get our mail from the mailbox, all I smell is onion and salami. That has to influence the people who are working in the UPS store during the day as well. But smell also acts on our subconscious, and we can find aromas either pleasant or unpleasant. They can actually debilitate us. And there are other things in the environment that can do the same thing, like too much connectivity, too much Wi-Fi, too much exposure. Think about hydration. 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. It's a trigger of daytime fatigue. In the afternoon, when you're tired at 2 o'clock, instead of a candy bar, if you don't have time for the power nap, take a glass of water. Guess what? Your joints will hurt less. You'll be able to move more. You'll feel more invigorated. And a 2% decrease in body water, and that's a very small amount, triggers your mindset. It triggers your ability to concentrate on a computer screen. Do you ever wonder why when you're working on a project for repeated hours, you somehow seem to lose focus? It's because of dehydration. And we've already talked about sleep. Sleep deprivation and sleep challenges are one of our most serious problems. And we often avoid the signals that our body gives us. How many times have you sat in a class and the professor has been so boring that you feel your head bobbing off to the side and you think, oh, I don't know if I can stand this for another 25 minutes. Or you're driving and the traffic is so heavy and you're so overly exhausted that you crank open that window or you turn up the radio and you think, if I can make it to the next exit, I'll be fine. And sometimes fine doesn't happen. So we ignore those signals that nature gives us, and sometimes we wait too long. So value yourself and your ideas. In order for people to be happy in their work, these three things are needed. 1, they must be fit for it. 2, they must not do too much of it, not too much in excess. And 3, they must have a sense of success about it. They must feel good about that process. We're all part of something bigger. We're all part of a big unit. We're all part of a big city, of a big country, of a big earth. We're all part of something, but we choose to be who we're going to be. We choose to be who we're going to be, and sometimes it's not with a cape because there's no perfection in life. It's not always a superhero with a cape who is going to save the day. I remember my 5-year-old grandson once said to me, you know, there's no such thing as superheroes. And I thought to myself, really? I should have known that years ago. I should have been able to tell my own son, your uncle. And maybe I should tell my other grandkids because they're all decked out like who knows who. I don't even know who these people are anymore. Green Hornet and Batman and Robin and everybody else. But there's no perfection in life. And success isn't going to come to Batman and Robin in the Batcave when the commissioner sends that call on his magical red phone. What my grandson used to say was, the real superheroes in life are those people who are the first responders who save our lives, like policemen and firemen and paramedics. They're the people who are the superheroes, not people with caped garments. So what are the lessons learned? Every idea is useful for something. We're all useful for something. We're all part of a great big picture, and it's our choice who we are. If you want it to be in costume, great. But you can create your own stress, or you can also overcome your own stress. So I ask you to look at what we looked at earlier. We talked about the 3 greatest sources of stress in your own life. We talked about the fact that who amongst us has stress in their lives. We've talked about some actions and some change and some controls that we can put in place and the need for balance. And before I close, I'm going to ask you this. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine that you were just born today. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. You were just born. And chances are, because you were just born, you were born stress-free. How would you live that life in order to ensure that you weren't able to complete my request for the 3 major stressors? You wouldn't have to worry about the actions and the change and the control and the balance, because you would set out on an even keel from day 1, being balanced and being stress-free and not needing to overcome it. So in the words of Julia Cameron, bless not only the road, but the bumps on that road, because they're all parts of your higher journey. Thank you so much for being with me today.